Everyone applauded him for his wealth, but no one knew that the woman who swept his office would be the one who would bring him to his knees. In the glass corridors of that corporate tower, where money seemed to flow like water and expensive suits signaled status, there was a story waiting to be told. A story that would forever change the perspective of a man who thought he had it all. Because sometimes, the most powerful lessons come from the humblest hands, from those we consider invisible. And this is precisely one of those stories that will make you reflect on the true meaning of respect and human dignity. Imagine for a moment walking through luxurious offices, where every step resonates with the echoes of power and boundless ambition. There, between marble desks and windows that touch the sky, a seemingly unbreakable routine unfolded day after day. Executives arrived in their luxury cars, discussed millions of dollars, and made decisions that affected thousands of people. Meanwhile, in the quietest corners of that same building, someone worked whose presence went completely unnoticed. A woman whose tired hands cleaned every surface, whose eyes had seen both pain and hope, and whose heart held secrets no one imagined. Life has a very peculiar way of testing us, especially when we believe we're untouchable. In those moments of greatest arrogance, when pride blinds us and we think we have absolute control over everything, it's precisely when the universe decides to send us a reminder. A reminder that true greatness isn't measured in banknotes, but in the ability to recognize the dignity in every human being. And what was about to happen in those offices would change not only the life of a millionaire, but also the way all of us understand the power of humility. If this story has you intrigued and you want to discover how a simple cleaning lady managed to transform an arrogant millionaire, subscribe to the channel and comment "Respect" so you know this lesson has touched your heart too. Her name was Maria Elena, although to most people in that corporate building, she was simply the cleaning lady. She arrived every morning before the sun painted the streets gold, walking almost an hour from her small apartment on the outskirts of the city. Her hands, weathered by years of hard work, firmly held the bag where she kept her work tools and a thermos of coffee she'd made with the last few spoonfuls. Her face was marked by the lines of time and worry, but also by a quiet determination that few people bothered to notice. She was a woman who had learned to be strong out of necessity, not choice. Maria Elena's life was a constant balance between survival and hope. A single mother of an 8-year-old son battling a chronic respiratory illness, every peso she earned had a clear purpose: medicine, doctor's appointments, and the rent for her modest home. At night, after cleaning offices for 10 hours, she returned home to care for her little Diego, who always greeted her with a smile that gave her the strength to continue. Her worn shoes told stories of miles traveled, of stairs climbed and descended, of knees that ached but never buckled in the face of adversity. She was invisible to those around her, but to her son, she was the world's greatest hero. Every day in those offices was a constant reminder of the worlds apart that existed between her and those who worked there. She saw executives complain about problems that seemed insignificant to her, overheard conversations about expensive vacations while she calculated whether she would have enough to buy her son's medications. Yet she never felt envy or resentment. Rather, a deep understanding that each person faces their own unique battles. Her philosophy was simple: work with dignity, hold your head high, and trust that one day things would get better. What she didn't know was that very soon, her quiet strength would be tested in ways she never imagined. In the marble hallways, Maria Elena moved like an efficient shadow, knowing every corner of the place better than many of the employees who had been working there for years. She had memorized everyone's schedules, knew who preferred their coffee hotter, who worked late and needed the lights to stay on a little longer. She was a living testament to the fact that true professionalism isn't about the position you hold, but about the dedication you put into everything you do. But in that world where status was everything, her professionalism went completely unnoticed, as if it were part of the furniture. And precisely that invisibility would make her the perfect witness to events that would change everything forever. Her story was that of millions of women who struggle in silence, who carry seemingly impossible responsibilities, but who find the strength to carry on in love and determination. Maria Elena represented all those unsung heroines who keep the world running while others take the credit. But fate had a much more prominent role in store for her than anyone could have imagined. Because sometimes, the most underestimated people are precisely the ones who have the power to bring about the most profound and lasting changes. Ricardo Mendoza was everything money could buy, but nothing the heart could value. Heir to a family empire built over 3 generations, he had grown up believing his last name was synonymous with superiority and that people of the lower class existed only to serve him. At 35, he ran the company with an iron fist and an arrogance that chilled the blood of anyone who crossed his path. His office, located on the building's top floor, was a luxurious sanctuary where he received millionaire partners and made decisions that affected the lives of hundreds of employees. To him, people like Maria Elena were completely invisible, mere disposable tools in his money-making machine. The morning that would change everything began like any other, but Ricardo's bad mood was particularly intense that day. He had lost a multimillion-dollar contract due to what he considered the incompetence of his subordinates, and he needed to vent his frustration on someone. When Maria Elena entered to clean his office, as she did every day at 7 in the morning, she found herself facing a storm she didn't deserve to face. "What the hell are you doing here so early?" he yelled at her without even looking up from her documents. She, accustomed to remaining invisible, mumbled an apology and continued with her work, but that only inflamed Ricardo's anger further. The humiliation he was about to unleash would mark a before and after in both of their lives. What happened next was a cruel display of power and contempt that left everyone present speechless. Ricardo began yelling at her in front of other executives who had arrived early for a meeting, falsely accusing her of moving important documents from his desk. "This woman doesn't know her place," he bellowed, pointing at Maria Elena with contempt. "People like you shouldn't even breathe the same air as us." The words came out of his mouth like sharp knives, cutting into the dignity of a woman who had never harmed anyone. The other executives watched uncomfortably, but no one dared to intervene for fear of becoming the next target of his uncontrolled fury. Maria Elena remained silent, her head bowed, as tears struggled to escape her eyes. Every word Ricardo spoke was like a slap to her soul, but she knew any response could cost her the job she so desperately needed to support her son. "Look at me when I'm talking to you," Ricardo yelled at her, forcing her to look up. "You're a useless, nobody who should be grateful I'm letting you work here." In that moment, something broke inside her, not her spirit, but the illusion that kindness and hard work were enough to earn basic respect. The pain she felt wasn't just from the public humiliation, but from the injustice of being treated as less than human by someone who knew nothing about her daily struggle. The silence that followed that explosion of cruelty was deafening. Ricardo, satisfied with his display of power, returned to his desk as if nothing had happened, while Maria Elena gathered her things with trembling hands. The other executives avoided eye contact, ashamed of having witnessed such an act of barbarism, but too cowardly to have defended an innocent woman. What none of them knew was that they had just witnessed the exact moment the seed of a transformation none of them could have imagined was planted. Because when you humiliate someone who has more dignity in their broken heart than you have in your entire empire, the universe has very particular ways of restoring balance. The days following that public humiliation passed with a tension that hung in the air like a storm about to break. Maria Elena continued with her work, but there was something different about the way she moved, a profound stillness that preceded major changes. While cleaning the files on the executive floor, her eyes fell on a framed photograph that had been in the main hallway for years, the image of the company's founder, Don Alberto Mendoza, Ricardo's grandfather. Her heart raced as she recognized those kind eyes she had met decades ago, when she was a young, newly graduated teacher and he was a visionary businessman who believed in education as an engine of social transformation. The world, definitely, was smaller than anyone could imagine. Her memory transported her back to those days when Don Alberto funded schools in slums, and she had been one of the teachers selected to lead his most ambitious educational project. For 3 years, they worked side by side, developing programs that changed the lives of hundreds of underprivileged children. He used to say, "Maria Elena, the true wealth of a nation lies in the education of its children, especially those society has forgotten. But when the economic crisis hit the country, the funds dried up, the schools closed, and she had to completely reinvent herself to survive. Don Alberto had died 5 years earlier, taking with him the values he had apparently failed to pass on to his grandson. The irony of fate was painful. The woman Ricardo treated like garbage had been his own grandfather's right-hand woman in the noblest work of his life. The second twist came unexpectedly during a board meeting where Ricardo was boasting about his latest financial achievements to international investors. Maria Elena was discreetly cleaning the meeting room windows when she heard Ricardo proudly mention the Esperanza Mendoza project, presenting it as his personal creation to impress potential partners. Maria Elena's hand stopped on the glass as she heard Ricardo claim authorship of the educational program she had designed and directed years before, the same project that had transformed the lives of thousands of children and had been her grandfather's most precious legacy. Indignation grew in her chest, but also a crystal-clear understanding of what she had to do. It was time for the truth to come out, not out of revenge, but to honor the memory of a good man and protect the future of the children who still benefited from that program. That same afternoon, while Ricardo was celebrating what he considered a successful presentation in his office, Maria Elena gently knocked on the door. "Excuse me, Mr. Mendoza," she said in a firm voice he hadn't heard before. "I need to speak with you about Project Hope." Ricardo looked at her with contempt, about to yell at her to leave, but something in her posture stopped him. "I was the one who designed that program with your grandfather," Maria Elena continued, taking a yellowed folder out of her bag containing documents, photographs, and letters signed by Don Alberto. "And I think it's time you knew the truth about the legacy you're using to enrich yourself." The color drained from Ricardo's face as his eyes scanned the irrefutable evidence Maria Elena placed on his marble desk. The room filled with a silence so thick it could be cut with a knife. Ricardo stared at the photographs where Maria Elena appeared with her grandfather, inaugurating schools, hugging children, holding recognition plaques. Don Alberto's handwritten letters spoke of her with a respect and admiration that contrasted starkly with the contemptuous treatment he had given her. "Your grandfather was an extraordinary man," Maria Elena said with a dignity that lit up the entire room, "and he would be deeply disappointed to learn how you treat people you consider inferior." At that moment, something began to crack in Ricardo's heart of steel, as if for the first time in his life he was truly seeing the person before him. The invisible woman had just revealed that he had been, unknowingly, in the presence of a living legend. The days that followed that revelation became a silent torment for both protagonists of this story. Maria Elena continued with her daily chores, but now she carried the weight of having exposed her soul to someone who had scorned her for so long. Every time she went in to clean Ricardo's office, she could feel his gaze following her, no longer with arrogance, but with something that seemed like curiosity mixed with shame. The nights had become especially difficult for her because after taking care of her little Diego, she would lie awake remembering Ricardo's surprised expression when he discovered who she really was. The public humiliation she had suffered now transformed into something more complex, the vulnerable exposure of her true identity to someone who perhaps didn't deserve to know her story. For Ricardo, those days were an emotional roller coaster he'd never experienced before. For the first time in his adult life, he found himself questioning not only his actions, but the very foundations of his existence. The photographs Maria Elena had shown him wouldn't leave his mind, especially one of his grandfather hugging a group of children while she smiled beside him, a dedication that radiated from the image. He began to recall fragments of conversations he'd had with Don Alberto years before, when he was barely a teenager, and his grandfather would proudly tell him about an extraordinary teacher who was changing the world one child at a time. "That woman has more greatness in her heart than many millionaires have in their bank accounts," his grandfather had told him, unaware that decades later, those words would resonate like a fulfilled prophecy. Maria Elena's loneliness intensified every night when she returned to her small apartment, where the walls seemed to whisper all the what-ifs of her life. She had given up a promising career in education to devote herself completely to raising her son, had accepted jobs far beneath her academic qualifications, and had endured social invisibility with a dignity that now felt like too heavy a burden. As she prepared dinner with the few ingredients she could afford, she wondered if she had done the right thing in revealing her past, if it wouldn't have been better to stay in the shadows where she at least had the security of a stable job. The fear of losing her job kept her awake, counting the hours until dawn, when she would once again have to face Ricardo's transformed gaze. Ricardo, for his part, had begun to experience something completely unknown to him: genuine shame. Every time he passed through the halls where he had publicly humiliated Maria Elena, he felt as if the walls retained the echo of his cruel words. He had begun to truly observe his cleaning staff, something he had never done before, and realized that each one had a story, a family, dreams, and struggles that he had completely ignored. At night, in his luxury penthouse, he sat in front of photographs of his grandfather and wondered how he had come to be everything Don Alberto would have detested. The opulence of his life, which had once brought him contentment, now felt empty and superficial, like a castle built on sand. The contrast between their realities grew more painful with each passing day. While Maria Elena struggled with medical bills and the constant worry for her son's health, Ricardo grappled with the crushing weight of realizing he had been living a lie his entire life. She faced economic poverty with a spiritual richness that radiated from within, while he swam in material wealth but drowned in an emotional poverty he was only just beginning to understand. It was as if the universe had held a mirror up to each of them, showing them truths they had both avoided facing for too long. And amidst that emotional tension, something was brewing, a transformation that would forever change the dynamic between these two seemingly irreconcilable worlds. Ricardo's transformation didn't come like a bolt of lightning in the night, but like the dawn that gradually dissipates the shadows of years of arrogance and emotional blindness. He began to do something he had never done before in his life: truly observe the people who worked at his company, learn their names, ask about their families, listen to their stories. One morning, he found Maria Elena preparing coffee in the conference room and, for the first time, offered to help her. "Allow me," he said with a humility she had never seen in him before. "It's the least I can do after all." That simple, seemingly insignificant gesture marked the beginning of a transformation that would lead him to rediscover the values his grandfather had tried to instill in him throughout his youth. The changes in Ricardo were evident to everyone in the company, but especially to Maria Elena, who began to see glimpses of the man her grandfather had raised beneath decades of privilege and arrogance. He began implementing policies that directly benefited the general services employees: salary increases, comprehensive health insurance, training programs, and educational scholarships for their children. But more importantly, he began treating them with the respect and dignity they deserved as human beings. "My grandfather was right," he confessed to Maria Elena one afternoon as she organized some documents. "True wealth is not in what you accumulate, but in how you positively impact the lives of others." His words came out with a sincerity that contrasted dramatically with the arrogance he had displayed weeks before. Maria Elena, for her part, began to recover something she had lost along the path of survival: her voice and her inner strength. She no longer walked the halls like a shadow trying to go unnoticed, but with the dignity of someone who knows her own worth and doesn't need the approval of others to validate it. When Ricardo proposed that she return to the world of education, offering her the chance to lead a new educational foundation that would honor Don Alberto's memory, she didn't respond immediately. "I need to think about it," she told him with a serenity that reflected her newfound strength, "because this time, if I accept, it will be on my own terms and with a guarantee that no child will ever be treated the way I was treated here." Her response wasn't defiant, but the natural affirmation of a woman who had rediscovered her inner power. The day Maria Elena agreed to lead the Esperanza Mendoza Foundation, something beautiful happened in that office that had witnessed so much humiliation. Ricardo stood when she entered, not as a condescending gesture, but as genuine recognition of someone whose greatness had always been present, but which he had been too blind to see. "It will be an honor to work with you," he said, extending his hand, "not as your boss, but as your partner in this mission that my grandfather loved so much." Maria Elena's eyes shone with a satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge, but with the poetic justice of seeing the seeds of goodness she had planted with Don Alberto decades before finally blossom through her transformed grandson. The entire company witnessed this extraordinary change. Employees who had witnessed Maria Elena's public humiliation now saw her walk those same halls, but with a managerial position and the genuine respect of the man who had once scorned her. She hadn't sought revenge or taken advantage of her new position to humiliate Ricardo as he had her. Instead, she used her influence to create programs that benefited all the people who, like her, had been invisible for so long. Her office became a refuge where employees at all levels could go when they needed to be heard, because Maria Elena understood better than anyone what it meant to feel small and ignored in a world that values money more than human dignity. The story of Maria Elena and Ricardo became something much bigger than a simple anecdote of personal transformation. It became a mirror where everyone could see themselves reflected and question their own attitudes toward those they consider different or inferior. In every corner of the company, in every coffee conversation, at every family gathering where this story was told, the same inevitable question arose. How many times have we judged someone by their appearance, their job, or their financial situation without taking the time to really get to know who they are? The uncomfortable answer was that all of us, at some point in our lives, have been both Ricardo and the silent witnesses of some injustice, and very rarely have we had the courage to be like Maria Elena, dignified in the midst of adversity. The true power of this transformation lay in a universal lesson that transcended the barriers of time and geography. Respect is not something you earn by what you have, but by how you treat others, especially those who seemingly have nothing to offer you in return. Ricardo had learned the hard way that authentic greatness is not measured in bank accounts or material possessions, but in the ability to recognize and honor the inherent dignity of every human being. Every time someone heard this story, they were confronted with an uncomfortable but liberating truth, that how we treat others is the most honest reflection of who we truly are inside. The wisdom that emerged from this experience spread like ripples on a still lake, touching lives far beyond the original protagonists. The company's employees began to treat one another with greater respect, executives developed a greater sensitivity to their staff's needs, and an environment was created where every person, regardless of their position, felt valued and heard. But the most powerful message was that we should never underestimate those we consider small or insignificant, because in that seemingly invisible person may reside the wisdom, experience, or lesson we most need to learn. Maria Elena had demonstrated that true influence comes not from the power you wield over others, but from the example of integrity and dignity you maintain even when no one is looking. This story became a constant reminder that we all carry within us both the capacity to be Ricardo at his worst and the possibility of being Maria Elena at her most dignified. The difference lies in the choices we make every day. We can choose to build walls that separate us from others based on prejudice and arrogance, or we can choose to build bridges of understanding and respect that connect us to our shared humanity. Every encounter with another person is an opportunity to practice authentic greatness, the kind that doesn't need to be announced or boasted about, but simply radiates from within when we treat every human being as the priceless treasure they truly are. The most beautiful legacy of this transformation was the realization that life's deepest lessons often arrive packaged in the humblest forms, through the people we least expect to teach us anything. Ricardo discovered that his true wealth lay not in his bank accounts, but in his ability to effect positive change in the lives of others, while Maria Elena rediscovered that her worth had never depended on external recognition, but on the integrity with which she lived every day of her life. Together, they became living proof that when pride surrenders to humility, and when humility meets genuine respect, miracles happen that transform not only individual lives, but entire communities and, eventually, the world itself. 5 years after that encounter that changed their destinies forever, Ricardo and Maria Elena met again in the same building, but the circumstances were radically different. He was no longer the arrogant millionaire who believed money made him superior to others, but a transformed man who had learned to measure his wealth by the positive impact he had on the lives of others. Maria Elena was no longer the invisible cleaner who walked the halls trying to go unnoticed, but the director of the most respected educational foundation in the country, whose work had benefited more than 10,000 underprivileged children. When their eyes met in the hallway where he had once publicly humiliated her, they both smiled with the wisdom of those who have learned that life has mysterious ways of teaching us exactly what we need to learn. The executive office where Ricardo had displayed his cruelty was now a meeting room where decisions were made that transformed entire communities. On the walls hung photographs of schools built, children graduating, and entire families lifted out of poverty thanks to educational programs designed with love and executed with dedication. Maria Elena had achieved something no amount of money could buy. She had created a legacy of hope that would transcend generations. Her little Diego, now a healthy and bright teenager, volunteered in the Foundation's programs, proud to have a mother who had turned her pain into purpose and her humiliation into inspiration for thousands. Ricardo, for his part, had discovered that true abundance is not found in what you accumulate for yourself, but in what you share with generosity and genuine love. His nights were no longer spent counting money or planning strategies to become richer, but rather designing programs that could positively impact as many lives as possible. He had learned that respect is not imposed through fear or intimidation, but rather cultivated through consistent and genuine acts of kindness. The company he had inherited had transformed into a model organization where every employee was treated with dignity and where economic growth went hand in hand with human and social development. On one of those golden afternoons that invite reflection, Ricardo approached Maria Elena in her office and said, "Do you know what the most ironic thing about all this is? I had millions in the bank, but I was completely bankrupt as a human being. You had empty hands, but your heart was full of all the wealth that truly matters." Maria Elena smiled with that serene wisdom that characterized her and replied, "True wealth is not inherited, Ricardo. It is built day by day with each act of kindness, with each moment we choose to see the dignity in others, especially in those the world considers insignificant." Her words floated in the air like a benediction, reminding them both that life's most valuable lessons often come disguised as adversity. He had millions in the bank, but it was she, with her tired hands and her pure heart, who showed him what it truly means to be rich. In that simple truth lay all the wisdom of a story that reminds us that true greatness is not measured by what we possess, but by how we use what we have to uplift others. Maria Elena had shown that even in the most vulnerable moments, dignity can shine brighter than any fortune, and that sometimes the people we least expect can be the teachers we need most. Her story became a beacon of hope for all those who have felt invisible, reminding them that their worth does not depend on the recognition of others, but on the integrity with which they live each day of their lives. If this story has touched your heart and made you reflect on the way you treat those around you, don't let that feeling sit alone. Share this message with someone who needs to hear it, because we all know someone who could benefit from this lesson in humility and respect. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to continue receiving stories that not only entertain you, but also transform your perspective on life and inspire you to be a better version of yourself. Because when we learn to see the greatness in others, especially in those the world considers small, we discover our own capacity to generate extraordinary changes in this world, which so desperately needs more compassion and less arrogance.